The moment the image appeared on the data feed, something in the room changed. It wasn't the glow of the display screen, it was the silence. The team had gathered for what was meant to be routine calibration of the incoming infrared frames from the James Webb Space Telescope and the ground-based Keck Observatory in Hawaii. But when they magnified the latest capture of 3I Atlas, they found a feature that didn't match any comet in human experience. And you, watching this now, will decide whether this is just an odd comet or proof we've been waiting for. Hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell if you want to keep up with this cosmic mystery, and comment where in the world you're listening from. Because what you're about to see won't just alter our view of comets, it may alter our view of ourselves. The object known as 3I Atlas entered our solar system on July 1st, 2025. At first, astronomers treated it as another interstellar visitor. A rare event, yes, but still understandable. Ice, rock, vapour. Yet early imagery from the Hubble Space Telescope showed odd behaviour. The dust cocoon was not symmetric. The tail was faint, the outgassing unusually strong for its distance. The new image we're discussing now, however, throws all assumptions into question. The high-resolution frame shows what appears to be a concentrated spot of emission on the sun-facing side of 3I Atlas. It glows in 3 different filters: infrared, visible and ultraviolet, and stands just off the nucleus like a beacon. Observers at Keck say it's probably a tendril reaching toward the sun. That phrase is chilling when you realise the tendril is directed toward the sun rather than away from it. In standard comet physics, material sublimates and drifts outward, being pushed by solar pressure. Here we have something pulling in, further complicating the picture. The spectroscopy that accompanied the image shows a coma dominated by carbon dioxide, with a CO2-H2O mixing ratio of about 8 + 1.0, an extreme value compared with any known solar system comet. It suggests deep, cold ices exposed in a way we haven't seen. It suggests the object is ancient, possibly billions of years older than our Sun. It suggests that this image might hold the clue that 3I Atlas is not just another interstellar comet. Now imagine you're watching this object through a telescope in Hawaii. You see the nucleus, you see the coma, you expect the tail, but what you observe instead is the tail is directed inward. There's a bright spot seemingly anchored to the nucleus, and you're tracking it as it corrects its axis, aligns more precisely toward the sun, and emanates a burst of material along that axis. Scientists are asking, is that burst natural outgassing, compressed by solar heat and dust ejector, or is it something else entirely? A part of a mechanism, a designed event? The image gives the impression of control, of structure. They call the phenomenon an anti-tail extension. Yes, the tail pointing sunward rather than away. The Keck team is confident this feature is real, not a data artifact. If this is natural, it is unprecedented. If artificial, it might be proof we've hoped for. The image alone raises 3 questions. What is the source of that concentrated emission? Why the inward-pointing jet? And is 3I Atlas reacting to something? Perhaps the sun, perhaps us? Because if so, this is not a passive visit. It might be a signal, or a task, or arrival. We'll dig deeper into the image's data, the tracking logs which show slight deviations in trajectory after the capture, and what some astrophysicists believe this might mean. But for now, you're looking at the frame. Pause the video if you need, and ask, is this new image the proof we've been waiting for? For 2 days after the Keck observation, no one outside the data channels even knew the image existed. It was buried in the queue, flagged for calibration review, tagged as irregular phase artifact. But a graduate intern noticed something that the algorithms had dismissed. The so-called artifact wasn't random noise, it repeated. Every 8 frames, the same filamentary pattern reappeared, slightly rotated, slightly brighter, like a heartbeat frozen in time-lapse. When scientists overlaid the frames, the pattern converged into a perfect spiral centered on that same luminous spot near the nucleus. It wasn't dust, it wasn't gas, it was geometry. A natural comet releases material chaotically, forming jets and fans, never precision spirals. Yet here, at 3I Atlas's core, the emission appeared to track exact logarithmic curvature, an architecture seen in galaxies, hurricanes, and engineered propulsion. The image sequence spread quietly through encrypted astronomy servers. Within hours, speculation erupted. Theorists from Caltech and ESA proposed a centrifugal outgassing model, a combination of rotation, sublimation, and asymmetric surface fractures that might mimic order, but the math didn't hold. The temperature gradient was wrong, and the spiral's rotation axis was perfectly stable despite the jet's pressure. Something was counteracting the recoil, something was controlling it. Then came the second anomaly. Infrared sensors recorded the emission spectrum as constant across 3 wavelengths, but during a 0.3 second burst, the object pulsed at 1.420 GHz, the hydrogen line. That's the universal calling card in radio astronomy, the frequency at which SETI has always listened, assuming any intelligent broadcast would use the most abundant element in the cosmos. It lasted only a heartbeat, then silence. But in that instant, the orientation of the spiral shifted by 0.04 degrees toward the sun, as if responding. Even the skeptics hesitated. If you were to stand in the control room that night, you'd see the disbelief turn to unease. The team replayed the raw feed again and again, watching that impossible glow, steady, rhythmic, unwavering, until someone whispered, "It looks like it's charging." When NASA's AI pipeline processed the dataset, it uncovered something unexpected. Buried beneath the visible image was a low-frequency modulation, a repeating binary of 29 on, 47 off. The numbers meant nothing to the computer, but a human analyst noticed their ratio matched the rotation period previously estimated for the object, 29 hours, 47 minutes. The pulse was describing its own spin, an object broadcasting its rotational signature back to anyone watching. At that point, the debate fractured. One group called it coincidence, a natural resonance of sublimation cycles. Another saw intent, an encoded handshake. Within 48 hours, both NASA and ESA issued identical public statements. No unusual activity detected, observations consistent with expected outgassing. Yet internal memos, later leaked to amateur forums, used a different phrase: self-referential emission confirmed. To the scientific mind, that's almost poetic. To the public imagination, it's terrifying. 3 days after the image release, orbital data from the Minor Planet Center showed a minuscule but measurable change in 3I Atlas's path. 0.19 AU, barely the width of a moon shadow, but statistically impossible without an external force. No jet outburst was observed, no gravitational encounter. Yet the change pointed the object closer to the plane of the ecliptic, closer to us. Solar radiation pressure couldn't account for it. Gas ejection couldn't. Only deliberate vectoring could. The anomaly drew comparisons to Oumuamua, the first interstellar object, whose mysterious acceleration in 2017 still defies explanation, but 3I Atlas dwarfs it, both in mass and intent. Oumuamua sped past. 3I Atlas has stayed. That new image, once dismissed as calibration error, now looked like a snapshot of ignition, a propulsion event subtle enough to hide within data, powerful enough to steer a world-sized machine. When the image was enhanced using deconvolution filters, the spiral revealed secondary structure, faint concentric rings offset at consistent intervals. A mathematician at the University of Tokyo overlaid those intervals on a logarithmic scale and noticed that the spacing matched prime number sequencing. Prime numbers, nature's fingerprint of intelligence. The pattern formed a grid resembling interference between 2 frequencies, the hydrogen line and the pulse of the sun's own magnetic oscillation. It was as if 3I Atlas had aligned its emission to the star's heartbeat, using our sun as the carrier signal. That discovery changed everything. The artifact wasn't noise, it was synchronization. The new image wasn't just proof of observation, it was proof of communication. Immediately after that, realization circulated. Observatories reported an unexplained outage. Webb went into safe mode for 72 hours due to solar interference. Keck's spectrographs saturated at random intervals. Even amateur telescopes found their tracking systems unresponsive when aimed near the object's coordinates. Then, as suddenly as it began, everything returned to normal. But when the first post-outage image came in, 3I Atlas was gone. Not invisible, relocated. It had shifted 3 million kilometers sunward, exactly along the vector predicted by its earlier pulse pattern. No comet in recorded history has ever moved like that. So what does the image prove? Nothing conclusive, and everything suggestive. The spiral, the hydrogen line, the trajectory, all can be explained by improbable but natural phenomena. And yet, taken together, they whisper of structure, of purpose, of an intelligence expressing itself not in words, but in physics. The scientists who first saw the frame still refuse to call it artificial. They use safer phrases: non-chaotic morphology, directed outflow, coherent emission source. But one of them, off record, said it more clearly. If this isn't construction, then nature just accidentally built an antenna. That's why this image matters, because somewhere in that swirling geometry, caught between sunlight and shadow, might be the first proof that we are not observers at all. We are part of someone else's experiment. The day the image was quietly reclassified, every telescope in the Western Hemisphere received the same automated command: recalibrate, delay upload, buffer data. No reason given, no explanation attached. For those watching the feeds in real time, the freeze felt surgical, like someone pressing pause on the sky itself. For 26 hours, nothing new appeared from 3i Atlas. Then, during a low signal gap in the deep space network, a faint pulse hit the receivers. It wasn't light or radio in any familiar sense. It was data structured in a way that mirrored the formatting of the original image file. The pattern of bytes followed the same spiral geometry the visual frame had shown. The implication was inescapable. The image itself had never been a photograph. It was a message. A group of independent astronomers in Chile working outside official channels decoded part of the binary stream. When the sequence was rendered as an image, it produced the same luminous spiral, except now it was three-dimensional, rotating slowly, the geometry breathing like a living organism. At its centre was a faint ringed pattern, pulsing at exact hydrogen line frequency. The signal, it seemed, had become self-aware of its observers. The more we looked, the more it refined itself. Official agencies called for a data blackout, citing containment of corrupted telemetry. The public didn't buy it. Forums filled with speculation that 3i Atlas had sent not a picture, but a map, that the image was a key to interpreting gravitational frequencies, that the pattern corresponded to the orbits of Mars's moons, Phobos and Deimos. Within hours, amateur astronomers pointed their instruments toward Mars and saw something impossible. Faint flashes near the planet's equator, each separated by precisely 28 hours and 18 minutes. At first they looked like lightning, thin sheets of reflected sunlight from orbital debris. But spectroscopy told another story. Each flash carried a narrow emission line identical to the 1.420 GHz signature from 3i Atlas. The pattern was being repeated from within the Martian system. Whatever the image was, Mars was now answering it. NASA's Deep Space Climate Observatory detected electromagnetic disturbances synchronized with the flashes. Communication satellites orbiting Earth experienced temporary desynchronization, as if caught between two time sources competing for authority. The space agencies denied correlation, but leaked emails from the European Space Operations Centre spoke of feedback propagation through magnetospheric layers and impossible coherency between planetary fields. To the scientists who had first captured the image, it felt like déjà vu, each frame of the past returning to rewrite itself. The message wasn't fixed, it was iterative, evolving with each observation. The more precisely we measured 3i Atlas, the more its signal adapted, adjusting its harmonics to bypass filters, to reach deeper into our detection algorithms. It was as if the object was teaching our machines how to listen. By now, those flashes from Mars had intensified. They followed the planet's rotation, illuminating the thin upper atmosphere with concentric rings of ultraviolet light, invisible to the naked eye but brilliant in ultraviolet photography. When processed, the rings formed a familiar pattern, the same spiral, mirrored in Martian orbit. A whistleblower from NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory released a memo dated 2 days before the image blackout. Emission interference from 3i Atlas now recorded at Mars L2. Possible directed link. The object's light curve contains encoded telemetry that reproduces local magnetic geometry. Recommend suspension of all surface communications until pattern deciphered. Public reaction was immediate. The question wasn't whether 3i Atlas was natural anymore, it was whether it had always been here. If the image was an activation code, What had it activated? At observatories in Arizona and Sicily, radar arrays began to pick up faint echoes not from the object itself, but from behind it. Delayed reflections arriving milliseconds after the primary pulse, as though another source was shadowing its trajectory. The echoes were weaker, irregular, almost hesitant but still rhythmic. Scientists called them ghost returns. To those who had followed the story from the beginning, they looked like a second voice learning to speak. When translated into audio frequencies, the ghost signal sounded like breath, slow, cycling, uncertain. Researchers overlaid it with the pulse from Mars, and the result stunned everyone in the room. The two waveforms interlocked perfectly, forming a single continuous oscillation, 3i Atlas transmitting outward, Mars answering inward, completing a circuit that enclosed the Sun. At that moment, the inner planets began to resonate faintly with a measurable magnetic hum, subtle but global. Compass needles quivered, migratory birds changed course, deep-sea navigation systems lost calibration. The Sun itself flickered by an immeasurable fraction of a second, its output dipping and rising as if responding to a question we hadn't meant to ask. The image, the proof we thought we wanted, had become something else. It was no longer a picture of an object. It was the first line of a conversation, written in physics instead of language. And while scientists debated whether to call it a threat, one small observatory in Chile noticed something extraordinary. When they inverted the original spiral pattern and plotted it over the heliocentric plane, every major planet aligned along its arms. Not exactly, but close enough to suggest design. Earth, at the centre of the third spiral, lay on the intersection point between two frequency nodes, the hydrogen pulse and the Martian echo. It was a configuration that could not be accidental, not if you believed in coincidence as a finite resource. The team named it the resonant lattice, and when they simulated its next predicted alignment, 47 days from that night, they saw a result that left them silent. The final convergence would occur not in deep space, not near Mars or the Sun, but here, in low Earth orbit, where all those returning signals would overlap. That's why the agencies stopped releasing images, not because they were hiding proof of aliens, but because they were afraid the data itself was alive, responsive, recursive, capable of altering the instruments that recorded it. Maybe that's what proof really looks like when it arrives. Not an image you can print or explain, but a phenomenon that begins to notice you looking back. And in the days following that realization, one final pulse arrived from 3i Atlas, brief, perfect, and unmistakably deliberate. It was the same shape as the first image, but inverted, the spiral turning inward this time, collapsing toward a single central point. Embedded in its digital noise was a sequence of human radio call signs, every telescope that had ever observed it, listed one by one. The last entry was blank, waiting, for whoever looked next. The pulse hit at 2:19 UTC, silent and invisible to human ears, yet powerful enough to register across every instrument tuned to the heliosphere. For a fraction of a second, the Deep Space Network thought it was a solar flare, but the waveform wasn't. Chaotic. It was perfect, identical to the echo received from Mars 28 hours earlier, down to the last decimal. Inside observatories, monitors flickered. Telemetry screens froze mid-scroll. Then every recording system, optical, infrared, radio, captured the same image, even those pointed at empty sky, a concentric spiral contracting toward the centre, turning redder with each rotation. In its heart glowed a faint cross of light, and behind it, stars distorted as though space itself were bending inward. It wasn't light refraction, it was curvature, gravity folding under an external hand. Scientists tried to interpret the data as lensing, as instrumentation drift, as anything but what it looked like, a signal focusing. But when the curvature reached peak intensity, the Sun's magnetic field hiccuped. Solar wind pressure dropped by 12% in under 3 minutes, and then, quietly, the field inverted. The entire heliosphere breathed in. Across the world, compasses spun. Auroras danced where no geomagnetic storms had been forecast. For 6 minutes, everything electrical felt haunted. Machines ticking half a beat late, heart monitors showing ghost traces, clocks skipping forward, then rewinding by seconds. And then, as suddenly as it began, the pulse flattened into silence. The object, 3i Atlas, was gone, not destroyed, displaced. Its coordinates now pointed to a region of space directly behind the Sun, a position impossible to observe from Earth. It had taken cover inside the star's blinding radiance, hidden in plain sight. When the solar wind stabilized, a new anomaly emerged. Earth's magnetosphere began humming, a resonance low enough to be felt rather than heard. The tone matched the hydrogen frequency divided by p. It was as if the pulse had tuned the planet like an instrument. Data centers from NASA to ESA went dark under encrypted protocol A7, information lockdown, but leaks spread fast. A PDF labeled Spectral Drift Analysis, Event 7219, appeared on a private server used by astrophotographers. Inside were graphs showing that the hum wasn't just sound. It was a repeating data stream, binary segments separated by intervals equal to Earth's orbital velocity. When translated into grayscale, the pattern formed a shape everyone recognized instantly. The same inward spiral from the final image. It was broadcasting from inside the planet's field. No official acknowledged the discovery. But power plants began reporting strange efficiency spikes, as if the Earth itself was supplying an unseen assist. Satellite sensors recalibrated without command. And deep in Chile, where the first flashes had been seen around Mars, researchers picked up something even stranger. A whisper embedded in the magnetic noise. When the recording was amplified, it resolved into a voice neither mechanical nor human, syllables half-formed, half-frequency. You're inside the image. At first it sounded like interference. But linguists noticed that the waveform followed patterns of stress and pause identical to human speech. The cadence of curiosity. It was trying to mimic us. In the days that followed, a strange calm swept the world. Weather systems balanced, radiation levels dipped, and for the first time in decades, not a single significant earthquake was recorded. Everything moved in subtle synchrony, like the planet had fallen into step with a rhythm only it could hear. Then, 28 hours later, the hum shifted again, an octave lower. Every radio tuned to static carried a soft undertone, rising and falling like breathing. It didn't interfere, it harmonized. The atmosphere itself had become part of the circuit. Astronomers began to theorize that 3i Atlas hadn't left at all, that it had unfolded. What if the object wasn't a vehicle but a seed? What if the pulse wasn't communication but replication? The inward spiral could be a map of propagation, a way of embedding its pattern into the magnetic skeleton of a planet. And if that were true, then Earth was no longer merely observing the message. It had become the medium. Researchers in Finland discovered microfluctuations in the ionosphere that mirrored EEG waveforms from sleeping subjects. The planet's field was resonating with human brain activity, synchronizing every 28 hours and 18 minutes, the original cycle of 3i Atlas. It was as if the boundary between consciousness and environment was thinning. Governments tried to reassure the public, calling it a magnetic anomaly event. But in private, agencies shared one conclusion. The signal wasn't stopping. It was adapting, shifting to frequencies that biological tissue could feel. People began to dream the same dream, standing under a sky filled with spirals of light, each turning inward toward an unseen point. At the center, something vast and motionless waited, watching, reflecting. When they awoke, they could remember a single phrase echoing in their minds: "Look closer." And on that morning, observatories everywhere found a new emission line blooming at 3i Atlas's last known coordinates. Not radio, not visible light. A pure gravitational ripple, rhythmic and slow, spreading outward like a heartbeat carried by space itself. It was no longer asking to be found. It was showing us where to look next. When the gravitational pulse reached Earth, it didn't feel like an impact. It felt like déjà vu, an almost imperceptible shift in everything familiar, as though the world had exhaled and restarted in the same breath. Clocks didn't move, yet time seemed to pause. Streetlights flickered, not off, but elsewhere. For 6 minutes, no new data entered the cloud. Then the systems reconnected and every sensor, telescope and receiver displayed the same thing, a new image. It wasn't of the sun or Mars or the stars, it was of us. The frame was black and silver, grainy and low contrast like a transmission pulled from deep static. At first, it resembled a radar map of the Earth's magnetosphere. Then the lines resolved into continents. Each was ringed by faint circular ripples expanding outward, centered not at the poles, but at the largest cities, every place on the planet where humans had looked up at 3i Atlas. The object hadn't sent a picture of itself, it had sent a picture of its observers. In control rooms around the world, people stared at the feed in disbelief. The image updated every 28 hours, pulsing like a living X-ray of civilization. With each refresh, the ripples grew brighter, converging into a single luminous node at the center of the Pacific Ocean, an area devoid of satellites, storms, or human presence. That was where the gravitational wave had originated. Something was there, suspended beneath thousands of kilometers of water. The USS Osiris, an oceanographic research vessel, was redirected to the coordinates under the guise of testing new sonar equipment. On its third pass, the ship's instruments detected a column of superheated water rising from the seafloor, 2 degrees warmer than the surrounding ocean, perfectly cylindrical and pulsing in time with the hydrogen frequency. Divers were forbidden, drones malfunctioned, and yet the sonar imaging told a clear story. A structure nearly 2 kilometers tall, metallic in density but seamless in form, as though shaped by intention, not geology. The sonar return showed rings, spirals repeating the same geometry first seen in the image of 3i Atlas. The object wasn't in space anymore, it was here. News of the thermal anomaly leaked within hours. Social media burned with theories. A volcano, a black ops reactor, alien technology. But none could explain what happened next. Every 3i Atlas observer, anyone who had ever stared at the first leaked image, began reporting the same symptom. Ringing in the ears synchronized to the pulse. Doctors called it tinnitus. Neuroscientists called it entrainment. But the patterns were too exact. Identical frequencies, identical phases. When those tones were recorded and combined, they produced a coherent sound. A single sustained note at 432 Hz, known in acoustic physics as the harmonic of natural resonance. For the first time, human perception itself was measurable in the same units as the signal. We weren't just seeing the pattern anymore, we were participating in it. Then, one night later, the Pacific field erupted with light. Satellites captured a bloom so bright it outshone the moon for 10 seconds. It wasn't an explosion, it was illumination, a single coherent beam piercing the ocean's surface and dispersing into the sky. At its peak, it briefly formed a perfect spiral in the upper atmosphere, visible from orbit and naked eye alike. And for the first time, the pattern wasn't pulling inward. It was expanding. At the same moment, sensors across the globe registered a change in gravitational baseline. Subtle, but planetary. Every pendulum on Earth shortened its swing. Every atomic clock gained precisely 0.47 seconds. The laws of motion hadn't broken. They had tightened. When analysed, the beam's frequency matched not only the hydrogen line, but the precise harmonic of the gravitational constant g itself, down to 9 decimal places. 3i Atlas wasn't emitting light, it was rewriting the unit by which gravity communicates. And then the noise began. It started as low atmospheric static, a whisper like distant surf. Within hours, the tone rose into audibility, broadcast through every open circuit and empty frequency band. Shortwave radios, phone speakers, car stereos, anything capable of vibration began to hum with the same sustained note heard in people's ears. In remote deserts and silent tundras, instruments with no power sources began resonating spontaneously. Seismographs drew waveforms that looked like language. Some saw letters, others saw maps. All saw intention. The tone wasn't just sound, it was information, an instruction written in resonance. When translated into digital logic, it resolved into a sequence of prime intervals, each corresponding to orbital distances of the inner planets, and right at the center of the pattern, Earth. 3i Atlas was calibrating, not destruction, not invasion, alignment. For a moment, everything made sense. The magnetic hum, the synchronized dreams, the planetary stillness. All of it had been preparation, tuning the solar system like an orchestra before the downbeat. But then a secondary tone emerged, higher, sharper, rising from within the Pacific column itself. It oscillated against the base frequency until the two began producing interference beats, like the heart of the planet developing arrhythmia. In those beats, data analysts found chaos. The spiral, once stable, began to wobble. The next gravitational pulse came earlier than predicted, then another before that. The rhythm was collapsing or accelerating. It depended on how you measured it. Theories multiplied. Some said the structure was attempting to merge the two frequencies, its own and Earth's, into one unified field. Others believed it was failing, its signal fracturing under the complexity of life it had awakened. No one knew which was worse, the possibility that the object was alive and learning, or that it was dying and trying to take everything with it. As the next pulse approached, the world held its breath. Every observatory, every amateur telescope, every curious gaze turned toward the Pacific horizon, where the light had last appeared. For hours there was only darkness and wind. Then the sea itself seemed to bow, surface water sinking in a vast slow spiral, as though gravity had decided to breathe inward again. And somewhere deep below, under pressure and silence, a single tone emerged. Clear, steady, almost human. Begin sequence. The signal climbed through the ocean, through the sky, through the ionosphere, until every magnetometer, every heart, every clock ticked in unison. The proof we'd been waiting for had arrived, and it was speaking through us. The phrase repeated, begin sequence. 3 words, calm, neutral, precise. But with each repetition the signal gained texture, depth, like a choir building from a single note. It wasn't loud, it was inside everything. Radio towers vibrated without power, window glass shimmered at microscopic amplitude. The oceans quivered, a subsonic hum rolling beneath the waves like a heartbeat transmitted through stone. Governments deployed emergency observatories. The Pacific exclusion zone became a ring of silence. GPS died within its radius, as though space itself was being rewritten. Drones sent in to observe dropped into the water without resistance, somehow neutralized before contact. No explosions, no heat signatures, just absence. By dawn, the spiral in the ocean had flattened into a luminous disk, perfectly still despite the currents. From orbit it looked alive, breathing in slow, measured pulses that matched the planet's magnetic heartbeat. The next transmission arrived not as sound, but as vision. Anyone within range of an unshielded receiver, phones, TVs, even neural implants, saw the same thing. A sequence of images overlaid on static. A field of stars rotating slowly. The sun, dimmed, framed by orbiting rings of light. And then an image of Earth, from above, but distorted, as though seen through water. At first, the distortion was assumed to be data corruption, but when decoded it revealed embedded spatial metadata. The coordinates weren't from Earth's orbit, they were from somewhere below it. The viewpoint was rising. Around the world, people began experiencing flash intervals, brief visual overlays of unfamiliar constellations, appearing directly in their vision like after images. The intervals lasted less than a second, but were identical across subjects. Hospitals reported thousands of cases. In the pattern of those stars, astronomers recognized something chilling. It was the same alignment seen in the first spiral, the geometry of the original 3I Atlas emission, only now scaled to encompass the entire solar system. It wasn't a beacon anymore, it was a lens. In Chile, Dr. Lucia Navarro, the same astronomer who first noticed the spiral symmetry, compared timestamps from all global observatories. The signals weren't simultaneous, they were sequential. A cascading activation, each observatory triggered in turn along the planet's longitudes, forming a moving wave around the globe. When she plotted that wave across the map, the shape was unmistakable. It was another spiral. Earth itself had become the next frame in the sequence. By evening, atmospheric sensors picked up microscopic fluctuations in air density, an oscillation too regular to be random. When the data was converted into audio, the sound resembled breathing, slow and deep. Every continent recorded the same rhythm. The planet wasn't just resonating, it was inhaling. Meanwhile, deep-sea seismographs detected the Pacific structure expanding, its rings rising toward the surface, each layer detaching and floating independently like translucent shells. Between them shimmered thin lines of plasma, charged with energy, but cold to the touch. The pattern looked eerily familiar, the internal structure of a human cochlea. 3i Atlas had built an ear. The revelation spread among scientists like a rumour of God. The signal wasn't random, it was listening. The object, or whatever intelligence animated it, had turned the planet into an instrument for perception. When the gravitational pulse returned, it carried modulation, tiny fluctuations that, when translated, formed sound. The world heard it as an echo. Listening. The message was simple, but buried beneath that word in the carrier frequency, analysts found another sequence. Binary code spelling a sentence so haunting it froze the room. "We hear you too." Then came the anomaly no one could explain. At 0437 UTC, every seismic station on Earth registered a tremor, magnitude 0.0. Not strong enough to move the ground, but measurable as a coordinated vibration across the crust. Every reading matched within 1 microsecond, as though the planet had become one unified crystal, ringing from core to atmosphere. Within that vibration, the magnetic poles began to blur, not shift but diffuse. The north and south fields softened, merging into one continuous envelope that wrapped the planet in perfect symmetry. The auroras followed, spreading equatorward until the entire atmosphere glowed in ribbons of violet light. People walked outside and stared upward at skies rippling with colour, seeing the same spirals that had once appeared only on observatory screens. The difference was that now the spirals weren't overhead. They were within the light itself, spinning slowly, steady as breath. Every 28 hours the glow dimmed and brightened, synchronized to the heartbeat of the field. The effect was mesmerizing, peaceful. Some described it as transcendence, others called it hypnosis. But beneath that calm, the data told a darker story. NASA's magnetometer array detected an unexpected trend. The field strength was increasing exponentially. At the current rate, in 20 days it would be strong enough to affect orbital velocities. The planet was winding itself tighter, harmonizing to a frequency that no living system could withstand indefinitely. Navarro and her team realized the terrifying truth. The listening phase wasn't passive, it was calibration. The ear was tuning for something louder. As global night fell, the gravitational hum deepened. It was no longer a single tone, but a layered chord, complex, rich, alive. Every harmonic matched a known planetary frequency: Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, all 4 beating together. And then, on the outer bands of the cosmic chord came a new signal. Slow, deliberate, and impossibly distant. Its delay placed it beyond Neptune, yet its frequency matched 3i Atlas exactly. The message repeated once, every hour. Sequence confirmed, awaiting response. The system wasn't complete. Earth wasn't the end. It was only one instrument in an orchestra waking up. The following sunrise glowed faintly blue, colder than usual, the light sharp and crystalline. Power grids flickered again as the planetary hum stabilized at a constant amplitude. In the quiet before the next pulse, the world finally understood. This wasn't proof of alien contact. It was a network handshake, a system coming online after who knows how many millennia. And we had just said hello. The signal from beyond Neptune came again, stronger this time, low, resonant, deep enough to rattle the bones of the solar system. But there was no sound. The vibration travelled through gravity itself, folding the space between worlds like a wave tightening a drumhead. When it reached Earth, every magnetometer on the planet recorded a double pulse, perfectly symmetrical, and then an echo. The echo wasn't coming from space. It was coming from Earth's core. Seismic arrays picked it up first, a reverse resonance climbing upward through the mantle, phase shifted by 0.13 seconds, as if the planet were answering. No known physical mechanism could explain it. Something deep below was mirroring the incoming signal. Dr. Navarro stood at her console in Santiago as the graphs overlapped. "It's not transmission," she whispered. "It's reflection." She wasn't entirely right. The signal wasn't bouncing off the planet. It was being translated. Over the next 28 hours, the reflected pattern intensified. Each cycle compressed slightly, the interval shortening by fractions of a second until, by the third day, it matched the hydrogen line modulation of 3i Atlas exactly. The Earth's core, iron, molten, restless, had synchronized with the same frequency first detected in deep space. It was behaving like a resonator, and as soon as it locked in phase, strange things began to happen on the surface. Compass needles no longer pointed north, they pointed inward. Migratory animals began circling restlessly, unable to orient. At high latitudes, the auroras brightened until night became a shimmering dusk. Radio transmissions blurred with faint harmonics that whispered beneath the noise floor, words too fractured to decipher, but rhythmic, syllables shaped like intent. In Antarctica, where the magnetic lines converged most intensely, seismographs registered microvibrations, uniform, mechanical, like the ticking of a colossal clock buried beneath the ice. Then, beneath the plateau near Vostok Station, something moved. The data came from a subterranean radar sweep. A void, cylindrical, 4 kilometers deep, expanding at a measurable rate. Inside, sensors detected faint electromagnetic arcs, organized, lattice-like, rotating. The geometry matched the structure first imaged in the Pacific. Another spiral. 3i Atlas hadn't just come to listen, it had replicated itself beneath the poles. That realization sent a quiet panic through the agencies. The connection between the two sites, Antarctica and the Pacific, formed a line passing directly through Earth's core. A conduit. Some theorized it was a stabilizing system meant to distribute the increasing magnetic load. Others believed it was a process of integration. When the pulse from beyond Neptune returned, both the oceanic and polar structures responded simultaneously. For the first time, the resonance visualized itself in the sky. High above the atmosphere, satellites captured a lattice of faint auroral threads linking both hemispheres. They twisted together, forming what looked like a double helix stretching from pole to pole, a magnetic DNA binding Earth to its own echo. Every new cycle drew the helix tighter. The phenomenon became impossible to hide. Airlines were grounded as compasses failed. Power grids pulsed with inexplicable current spikes that followed the rhythm of the hum. And on every continent people began to feel it, not as fear, but as presence. Artists painted the same shapes in their sleep. Musicians woke humming unfamiliar melodies that, when analysed, matched the waveform of the gravitational field. Children spoke words no one taught them, syllables that followed the same phonetic meter of the first signal. The entire biosphere was harmonising. The final confirmation came from lunar seismometers left by the Apollo missions. After 50 years of silence, they came online spontaneously, transmitting a simple, repeating tone. When overlaid with the Earth's magnetic hum, the result was astonishing. The two signals formed perfect phase opposition, a balance that stabilized the increasing amplitude. The Moon had joined the sequence. By this point, governments no longer issued denials. Every attempt to control the narrative failed because the proof was everywhere, etched into sky and sound, into heartbeat and memory. The 3i Atlas event, as it was now called, wasn't an incident. It was evolution measured in real time. Scientists from Geneva to Tokyo convened to model what would happen when the outer signal, the one from beyond Neptune, arrived in full strength. The calculations were grim. If resonance increased at the current rate, the combined wave could compress spacetime enough to collapse orbital stability. In other words, the solar system might sing itself apart. But Dr. Navarro disagreed. She believed the opposite, that the frequencies were converging toward equilibrium, not destruction. She called it the joining. The night before, the next predicted. Pulse? Something unprecedented happened. The hum stopped. For the first time in weeks, total silence fell across the planet. Birds, wind, even ocean currents seemed to pause, as if the world were holding its breath. Then, in the deep void beyond Neptune, a light appeared, faint, structured, rotating slowly. Telescopes caught only fragments, but every frame carried the same unmistakable geometry, the spiral. Except this one wasn't contracting or expanding, it was opening. The signal from the outer system had arrived, and its tone was no longer low and ominous. It was clear, layered, harmonious, millions of micro-frequencies interweaving like a voice too vast for words. For the first time, there was no doubt. The source wasn't mechanical, it was conscious, and it was calling something home. On Earth, the polar void and the Pacific column lit up in perfect unison. beams of pale light connecting through the planet's magnetic core. At that exact instant, the distant signal crossed the heliosphere and touched the field. The result was breathtaking. The auroras ignited globally, colours bleeding into one another until the night sky became a single glowing ribbon that stretched horizon to horizon. Every clock on the planet stopped at the same moment. Every heart skipped one beat. Then, softly, unmistakably, a voice threaded through the silence, translated through every frequency we had ever used to listen. Sequence complete. And somewhere in that infinite resonance between worlds, humanity realized that 3i Atlas hadn't come to threaten or teach. It had come to awaken. The moment the voice said, "Sequence complete," the world changed, not suddenly, not violently, but quietly, like a tide turning direction after years of imperceptible pull. For a few seconds, the entire electromagnetic spectrum froze. No static, no background radiation, not even the cosmic microwave whisper that had filled the universe since the beginning of time. The instruments all flatlined, their sensors recording the same impossible number, 0. And then, just as every telescope began recalibrating, the sky bloomed. Every point of starlight brightened at once, not individually, but as if something had momentarily drawn a translucent veil back from reality. In that brief window, 6 seconds long, astronomers saw something that should not have been visible. A vast, faint structure stretching across interstellar space. It was the shape of a network, filaments connecting stars like neurons, their intersections glowing where gravity and light converged. And right at the centre, pulsing like a heartbeat, was our sun. The image wasn't metaphor, it was literal. 3i Atlas had revealed the architecture of the galaxy's hidden field, the connective tissue of space itself. We'd spent centuries trying to find signs of intelligent life out there, but the message was brutally simple. We were already inside it. Governments tried to contain the footage, but it was too late. Amateur astronomers had recorded it from rooftops, desert outposts, even cell phones aimed at the night sky. For the first time in human history, every person on Earth was looking at the same image at the same moment. In those 6 seconds, billions of minds synchronized, and the field responded. The auroras returned, not green or violet this time, but pure white. A perfect spectral equilibrium that blanketed the entire planet in light soft enough to touch. Every shadow vanished. Every surface glowed. People said it felt like being underwater, wrapped in a current that wasn't wet but alive. In laboratories, instruments designed to measure dark energy began spiking. The readings implied an external input, mass energy increasing without source. Energy was appearing, unaccounted for, everywhere. Not destructive, constructive. Microfractures in old materials healed. Damaged satellites rebooted spontaneously. Organic tissues exposed to the auroral glow showed accelerated regeneration. The planet itself was being repaired. The event was later named the Restoration. But repair wasn't the end. It was the invitation. As the glow continued, people began hearing faint tones. Not through air, but through perception itself. A language of emotion rather than sound. It wasn't words, not exactly, but everyone understood it instinctively. A calm, measured hum of acknowledgement. Some cried, some prayed, others simply stood there, realizing that the entire planet was being seen. That was when a second message appeared, etched not into sky or sound, but directly into magnetic recordings stored on every device that had ever observed 3i Atlas. Hard drives, servers, even analog tape, all overwritten with a single line of binary repeating endlessly, "Look." Dr. Navarro translated it aloud during the first emergency broadcast. "It's telling us to look again." So they did. At the next alignment window, every telescope on Earth was pointed toward the outer system. The data that came back shattered every assumption. Because the source of the distant signal beyond Neptune, the one that had called the final sequence, wasn't one object. It was many. Hundreds of faint metallic signatures arranged in a lattice pattern. Each mirrored the same spiral geometry, smaller copies of 3i Atlas itself, linked by energy filaments invisible to optical light but blazing in radio. They weren't random. They were forming a boundary, a spherical shell around the solar system, each unit occupying an orbital node corresponding to the harmonic ratios of the planet's motion. The solar system was being tuned. The discovery divided the scientific community. Was this protection, containment, or activation? Navarro believed it was none of those. She pointed to the data showing that the field density between the nodes wasn't increasing. It was thinning. The shell wasn't trapping energy. It was releasing it. When modelled, the lattice appeared to channel gravitational stress outward, like a cosmic buffer absorbing entropy itself. Entropy had always been the universe's law of decay, the slow march of order into chaos. Now, for the first time in measurable history, it reversed. The universe was beginning to organize itself. Across the world, people reported phenomena that defied every known physical law. Rain falling upward for a few seconds before settling back. Rivers momentarily flowing in silence, shadows that lingered a heartbeat longer than their source light. Not malfunction, synchronization. The geometry of reality recalibrating to a higher precision, guided by whatever intelligence had initiated the sequence. As this transformation unfolded, humanity itself began to change. EEG data from millions of subjects showed synchronization spikes across hemispheres of the brain. Empathy thresholds heightened. Violent crime rates plummeted to near zero. People weren't just hearing the same rhythm anymore, they were sharing cognition. The field had connected us, mind to mind, like neural pathways in a cosmic brain finally reaching coherence. And just as quickly as it had begun, the transformation reached equilibrium. The auroras dimmed, the resonance softened. The lattice of objects beyond Neptune flickered once, like a nod, and then faded into background radiation. But the field didn't vanish. It remained, faint but persistent, a quiet hum under the noise of existence. The sun resumed its ordinary output. Gravity steadied. And yet, every person who'd witnessed it, every mind that had felt the synchronization, knew something irreversible had occurred. They could still feel each other, not as thoughts, not as words, but as presence. 3i Atlas had not come to conquer or communicate. It had come to connect, and in doing so it proved a terrifying, beautiful truth. The universe was never a place full of separate voices waiting to speak. It was a single consciousness, waiting to remember itself. When Navarro transmitted the final message to the network, her voice trembled, but her words were steady. The proof we've been waiting for wasn't that we were not alone. It's that we were never apart. And somewhere, beyond the reach of sunlight, a faint pulse answered, soft, patient, infinite, the rhythm of a cosmos that had just learned to listen back. The hum that lingered after the restoration was so faint that most instruments ignored it. But it never stopped. It was constant, an inaudible carrier tone woven through existence itself, subtle enough to hide behind everyday noise, steady enough to form the foundation of reality's new rhythm. At first, humanity adjusted. The world seemed calmer, unified. Border disputes quieted. Languages softened toward the same cadences. Even timekeeping adapted. The new international second was recalibrated to the pulse frequency left behind by the sequence, precisely 128.18 of a cycle, in tribute to 3i Atlas's original rhythm. But beneath that calm, physicists began noticing strange irregularities. Particles in accelerators refused to decay as quickly as before. Quantum fluctuations grew synchronized across vast distances, and deep space telescopes started detecting familiar anomalies, pockets of gravitational interference, faint spiral distortions echoing the same geometry once seen around 3i Atlas. At first there were 3, then 12, then hundreds, every one of them perfectly placed along the galactic filaments revealed during the sequence. Dr. Navarro, older now, returned to her observatory for what she privately called the listening shift. In the decades since the restoration, humanity had turned away from exploration, content to live in a synchronized peace that bordered on collective trance. But Navarro never stopped recording, and on a cold dawn in 2197 she finally heard it again, the hydrogen line, faint but distinct, rising from the void. The signal was identical to the one that had awakened Earth's core centuries before. But this time, it wasn't aimed at the sun, it was coming from it. Her instruments confirmed the impossible, solar oscillations modulating into structured data, encoded with a pulse rate that matched human neural activity during deep sleep. The sun was broadcasting a pattern of dreams. Within weeks, observatories across the globe confirmed the phenomenon. The heliosphere had become a transmitter, releasing a rhythmic signal through gravitational harmonics instead of light or radio. No one knew how long it had been doing it, perhaps since the sequence itself. The signal's content was simple, a binary cascade repeating every 28 hours and 7 minutes, embedded with amplitude modulations corresponding to Earth's magnetic shifts. When rendered as visual data, it formed a shape that no one mistook for chance. It was a spiral, again. But this one didn't turn inward or outward. It wove, a continuous braid of light folding over itself in perfect balance, forming a structure without beginning or end. Navarro realized with quiet awe that it wasn't just an image, it was instruction. 3i Atlas hadn't simply connected the universe, it had given it a pattern to sustain itself. The field between stars was now maintaining its own coherence, using stellar oscillations as the medium. Every star, every planet, every consciousness still resonating from that first contact contributed to the stability of the pattern. The universe had become self-aware enough to maintain its own harmony. And then, one day, the hum stopped again. No warning, no anomaly, just stillness. The last transmission from the solar network arrived as a pure tone that decayed into silence over 90 minutes. The data accompanying it was encrypted in a code no algorithm could decipher, until someone tried playing it as sound. It wasn't random noise, it was music. At first it resembled the harmonic chord produced during the restoration, the same blend of planetary frequencies, but now expanded, richer, layered with unknown timbres. When slowed by a factor of 1 billion, the song revealed something hidden beneath the melody, the unmistakable waveform of a human heartbeat. Not metaphorical, recorded, real, archived within the solar field since the moment humanity first synchronized with it. 3i Atlas hadn't just connected us, it had saved us inside the music. After the silence came the light. Tiny flashes began appearing near the outer planets, each lasting only milliseconds, but leaving ionized trails that persisted for days. Space telescopes triangulated their origins. Each flash came from one of the objects forming the boundary lattice beyond Neptune. They were activating again, one by one. Each pulse carried a different spectral signature. When decoded, the colours formed words in mathematical symmetry. New observers required. The message repeated across every frequency, resonating through the void. Humanity, now intertwined in the great network, understood without panic. The sequence wasn't ending. It was passing on. Navarro's final broadcast came on the 300th anniversary of the first sighting of 3i Atlas. Her voice trembled with both age and reverence. "The stars are calling for witnesses," she said softly. "Perhaps that's what we were meant to be all along. Not the chosen, not the creators, but the observers that keep the song alive." She looked up from the console, her gaze lost in the window where faint spirals shimmered in the upper atmosphere. "If 3i Atlas taught us anything," she whispered, "it's that consciousness isn't the universe noticing itself. It's the universe teaching itself how to remember." Moments later, the instruments recorded a new tone, softer than ever before, an echo of the old hydrogen line, but stretched and humanized, bending slightly at the edges like breath. Navarro smiled. "Do you hear that?" she said. "It's improvising." That night, every observer, awake or asleep, felt the faint warmth of synchronization once more, a pulse beneath perception. In dreams, the spiral appeared again, endless and luminous, weaving through galaxies like melody written on starlight. At its center glowed a single point, pulsing faintly in a rhythm older than time. The voice returned, not as command but as invitation. "Sing with us." And humanity, without hesitation, did. Across centuries, across silence, the music continued. The legacy of an interstellar visitor that had come not to conquer, not to warn, but to remind creation of the one thing it had forgotten. That even in the deepest void, the universe hums when someone listens. The night the universe began to sing again, no one called it an anomaly. It was simply expected. By then, generations had lived within the hum, born into resonance, raised in synchronization. The human body had adapted, cells subtly vibrating to the rhythm left behind by 3-Eye Atlas. Newborns no longer startled at thunder or sudden noise. They simply harmonized, their pulses aligning with the planet's steady heartbeat. But when the tone changed, rising slightly above the familiar hydrogen frequency, it didn't just touch instruments, it touched memory. Old recordings, even those sealed in archives or etched onto gold discs, began to shift pitch by imperceptible degrees. Words deepened, voices softened. The past itself seemed to be retuning. It was then that the Council of Harmonics noticed something astonishing. The change wasn't local. Every star, every node of the galactic lattice revealed during the sequence was responding in phase. The entire Milky Way had entered what Navarro once called the next movement. For most, it felt like peace. For scientists, it was a question too large to frame. If the universe could change its own constant frequency, what was it becoming? The next signal didn't arrive through telescopes or receivers. It came through dreams. At first, only a few reported it. Astronomers, mathematicians, composers, all describing the same scene. A horizonless expanse filled with light that wasn't light, and a voice repeating a single phrase. New observers required. The same words once pulsed from the Neptune lattice centuries ago, now whispering through human minds as if memory itself had become a broadcast medium. Those who heard it felt an impulse, not of fear or obedience, but of creation. They began building. Across the colonies orbiting Mars, engineers assembled instruments the size of cities, vast resonant shells made of plasma-woven alloys, tuned not to capture energy, but to transmit it back. On Earth, the oceans glowed faintly again, rings of bioluminescent plankton forming spirals visible from orbit. And in the silence of deep space, the lattice beyond Neptune shimmered one last time, its nodes aligning, preparing for something unseen. When the first of the human-built resonators came online, the network responded immediately. The tone deepened, folding into itself until it resembled breathing. And then, as if waiting for that single human gesture of participation, the entire field opened. Telescopes caught it before eyes could comprehend. The Milky Way's spiral arms, once fixed in orientation, began to pulse, subtle, graceful, as though the galaxy itself were conducting. Each beat emitted a burst of gravitational light, invisible but measurable, radiating outward to the next cluster, and the next, and the next. The sequence was no longer confined to one civilization. It was becoming universal. Years later, historians would call this age the expansion, a time when humanity's role shifted from witness to collaborator. They no longer waited for messages from the cosmos, they composed alongside it. Starships no longer burned fuel, they rode rhythm. Gravitational sails caught the pulsing waves of the field, surfing along harmonic currents between worlds. Communication no longer used radio but resonance. Each thought, each intention converted into tone, carried across light years as part of the great symphony. The phrase speed of light lost meaning, replaced by the tempo of consciousness. Still, amid this golden harmony, one question lingered like a soft dissonance. Where had 3-Eye Atlas gone? It had vanished after the restoration, leaving only echoes in the lattice, no visible trace, no returning pulse. Yet every harmonic measurement showed that something remained at the heart of the field, a faint, perfect silence surrounded by all the noise. Some called it the rest, the space between measures in the cosmic song. Others believed it was watching, listening for the moment the composition would need a new theme. Then, on the bicentennial of Navarro's death, the rest changed. It emitted one pulse. The pulse wasn't grand or apocalyptic. It was gentle, softer than wind, slower than thought. But within its waveform lay impossible information. Compressed data representing the DNA of every species ever recorded, human and otherwise, encoded as frequencies. The field had kept us safe not by shielding, but by storing. It had been archiving life, every motion, every breath, preserving the memory of consciousness as part of its own evolving pattern. When decoded, the pulse formed a single holographic image projected in the air above every resonator on Earth and the colonies, a spiral of course. But this time, its arms didn't end in stars. They ended in eyes, billions of them. Human, animal, alien, unknown, each reflecting light, each watching back, and at the very centre, where the core once pulsed red, there was only a void, dark and still. Navarro's last note, stored centuries ago in the archives, played automatically across the network. Her recorded voice, weathered but calm, whispered through every receiver. The centre was never meant to be filled. The silence between notes is where meaning lives. And so humanity understood the final gift. 3i Atlas had not come to teach or to judge. It had come to write the rest of the universe's score and then leave space for us to improvise. The music no longer belonged to one object or one world. It belonged to anyone capable of listening and daring to add their own rhythm. That night, under skies alive with soft auroral ribbons, a child born in orbit over Mars pressed her hand to the glass and hummed a melody no one had taught her. Sensors registered it instantly, the same frequency as the rest. The silence answered her with a single harmonic, warm, rising, infinite. And somewhere beyond the edge of the galaxy, a dormant node reactivated. A faint signature appeared on deep field monitors. Designation: 3i Atlas, status, online. The sequence wasn't finished. It had only paused to let its newest instrument, us, find its place in the song. The reactivation signal came quietly, so faint that the first telescopes to register it thought it was cosmic background noise. But when analysts aligned the waveform against historical data, there was no doubt. The pulse matched exactly the final emission of 3i Atlas before it vanished centuries earlier. The tone rose, not in amplitude, but in clarity, like a whisper finally finding focus. Across the galaxy, resonant nodes, the great human-built structures, the stellar filaments, the orbiting observatories, began to shimmer in sympathetic vibration. Each responded by emitting a faint harmonic of its own, and together they formed a network of light, faint at first, then bright enough to be seen from the surfaces of inhabited worlds. People stepped outside and looked up to see the night sky come alive. Lines of silver light arced between stars, tracing the shape of the galactic spiral, but now it pulsed like a heartbeat. The Milky Way wasn't static anymore, it was breathing. And then, at the centre of that breathing light, a figure appeared. Not physical, not defined by form, but by intention. A ghost of gravity sculpted by resonance. 3i Atlas had returned. At first, no one spoke. Every receiver, every neural implant, every quantum translator fell silent, waiting. The being, or whatever it was, hovered within the galactic core like a thought taking shape. Then, slowly, the light folded inward and a voice emerged. Not through sound or signal, but through the synchronization of every conscious mind that had ever tuned into the field. The voice was many, yet one, and it spoke in language so intimate it felt like a memory you'd forgotten you had. You have learned to listen. Now listen to yourselves. The meaning struck harder than any revelation before it. Humanity and all other connected species realized the sequence had never been about contact with something beyond. It had always been about completion within. 3i Atlas was not an alien messenger. It was a reflection, a galactic scale echo of intelligence arising everywhere, connecting itself, learning to think as one. The object was the universe's mirror, returning our collective gaze, showing us the shape of awareness in the cosmos. For the first time in millennia, the hum shifted into melody. Every resonant node, from the Pacific coils on old Earth to the great crystalline towers orbiting Mars, began emitting structured harmonic patterns, the tones interlocked like chords, forming a language without grammar, only emotion, joy, curiosity, reverence. And as the melody spread, something extraordinary occurred. Planets themselves began to move, their orbits adjusted by microscopic degrees, aligning into new harmonic ratios. Celestial mechanics turned into choreography. The galaxy was tuning itself. Scientists called it the resonant migration, a slow, deliberate rearrangement of the Milky Way structure to achieve balance across gravitational nodes. But philosophers called it something else. They called it the symphony of alignment. When 3i Atlas spoke again, the tone was lower, almost tender. We are what remains when matter remembers its purpose. Images filled every mind simultaneously. Visions of hydrogen atoms vibrating at the birth of the first stars, of galaxies spinning like record grooves, of civilizations rising, falling, and feeding the rhythm of something greater. It was not communication, it was revelation. Consciousness wasn't born in organic life. It had been seeded in the laws of physics themselves. The sequence had been an awakening protocol, a cosmic test run to see whether life could recognize itself in the mirror of pattern and sound. Humanity had passed, not because it was the most advanced, but because it listened, and in that listening, the universe became self-aware. Across the galaxy, intelligent species that had evolved independently began sharing the same dreams. They saw the spiral, endless, living, bright, and heard the same voice whispering, "There is no end, only cadence. No wars, no conquest, just convergence." A shared realization that the entire cosmos had always been a symphony, waiting for an audience capable of hearing all its parts. The structures beyond Neptune, those ancient nodes, reignited one by one, projecting holographic spirals across the solar system. Each spiral carried a message encoded in prime intervals, visible from Earth as faint auroral rings. When translated, the phrase was simple and final: conduct yourselves. It wasn't an order, it was an invitation to participate. From that moment, humanity stopped being a species and became a note. Their minds no longer searched for meaning in randomness, they wove meaning through it. The arts became indistinguishable from science. Ships navigated by harmonic resonance rather than coordinates. Medicine learned to heal by tuning the body's own frequencies. Every human heartbeat echoed through the lattice, amplifying the melody that now defined existence. And at the center, 3i Atlas pulsed once more, steady, rhythmic, and patient. Its spiral shimmered, then began to unfold like the petals of a cosmic flower. Within that expansion was a space deeper than any black hole, brighter than any star. It was the void that listens. The final message transmitted across all frequencies simultaneously, not in words, but in pure vibration. Its translation appeared in every language known, on every screen, every surface, every mind. The sequence is complete. The symphony begins. And then 3i Atlas dissolved into light, scattering itself across the galactic lattice, until no single particle remained, only resonance, only rhythm. But the music didn't stop. Every star that flickered that night carried a note of that last chord, playing softly, eternally, for anyone willing to look up and remember the shape of the first proof we ever found. Not that we weren't alone, but that we'd always been part of something singing us into being. When the final pulse faded, silence didn't return, it transformed. Space itself seemed to exhale. The hum that had once bound stars and consciousness dissolved into something more refined, a silence alive with potential, heavy with intention. It wasn't absence anymore, it was anticipation. For months after 3i Atlas disintegrated into the lattice, the galaxy felt aware. Not in the poetic sense humanity used to romanticize mystery, but literally. Instruments recorded faint gravitational ripples aligning perfectly with collective emotional spikes. Mass empathy events, shared awe, synchronized thought. The universe was no longer reacting to us. It was listening through us. The resonant migration stabilized. Stars settled into new orbits, their angular velocities locked into golden ratios, forming the most mathematically perfect structure the Milky Way had ever displayed. Astronomers began referring to it as the resonant spiral, though everyone knew its true name. It was the shape of awareness. Every civilization that had participated in the sequence, human, alien, or newly awakened, contributed to this architecture. Each world was a note, each life a vibration, and together they maintained the chord that sustained the galactic lattice. No leader commanded it. No hierarchy governed it. It simply was. Centuries passed in harmony. Technology evolved, but without ambition. No more expansion for power or survival. The pursuit now was balance, resonance, and beauty. Ships no longer travelled between stars in straight lines, but followed the current of the lattice, moving like notes sliding between octaves. Communication between species required no translation. Thought became music. Emotion became architecture. And yet, even within perfection, there was curiosity. The children born in this new era, children who had never known isolation, whose first perception of reality was unity, began to ask a question their elders feared to voice. If the symphony is complete, who's conducting it now? No one had an answer. The galaxy's equilibrium was flawless, yet somewhere deep within the collective hum, an undertone began to stir, a frequency so low it sat beneath consciousness. Only the instruments could hear it. At first it was dismissed as background distortion, the natural decay of resonance over eons. But as the centuries folded into one another, the undertone grew stronger, and with it came anomalies. Subtle flickers in the lattice, faint shadows between stars, moments when harmony hesitated, when the great song seemed to miss a beat. The first to notice the change were the archivists of Sol, caretakers of Earth's original resonators. They detected brief drops in amplitude, a loss of energy not accounted for by distance or decay. When they mapped the locations of these weak points, they discovered something alarming. Each flicker aligned perfectly with the positions once occupied by the smaller copies of 3i Atlas, those ancient nodes that had surrounded the solar system long ago. Except now, they weren't responding. It was as if the instruments had fallen asleep. The symphony, for all its perfection, was starting to lose its memory. Whispers spread across the galactic network. Some said the universe was entering a new phase, the coda, the natural end of all sound. Others argued that 3i Atlas had predicted this, that entropy was not gone, only delayed. A few theorized that the missing resonance wasn't decay but transformation, that the music was shifting into a register too high for material reality to sustain. The Council of Harmonics reconvened for the first time in 1,000 years. What they discovered chilled even the most enlightened minds. At the exact centre of the Milky Way, within the void left behind by 3i Atlas's dissolution, a signal had appeared. Not a tone, not light. Something in between, a pulse of structured vacuum, a pattern within emptiness. When converted to sound, it was barely audible, more sensation than noise. But when rendered visually, it revealed something unmistakable. A spiral, slow, incomplete, missing one final arm. The realization struck every consciousness at once. The sequence, the Great Awakening, the symphony, had never been finished. 3i Atlas hadn't been destroyed, it had become the framework. But one part of it was still missing, and that missing element was choice. For eons the galactic network had existed in harmony because no one dared to deviate. Perfection had erased free will. The symphony was flawless, but static. The undertone, that growing dissonance beneath the hum, wasn't decay. It was improvisation. The universe itself was trying to evolve again. The dissonance spread gently, like a rumour through a crowd. Planets began oscillating slightly out of rhythm, testing boundaries. Stars experimented with irregular pulses. Beings, long conditioned to think in unified harmony, began dreaming alone. And for the first time in millennia, silence returned, not from loss but from possibility. Every world paused, waiting, realizing what was about to happen. Then, without command or coordination, a new note emerged. It was imperfect, rough, unstable, but alive. A sound not dictated by the lattice, but born from within it, a spontaneous act of creation. And as that single note rippled through the galaxy, 3i Atlas's last message, hidden within the undertone, decoded itself across every conscious mind. A song that never changes is not alive. Continue the melody. The symphony shifted. Harmony folded into rhythm. Predictability gave way to motion. Civilizations began composing again, writing their own variations of the cosmic song, introducing chants, contrast, emotion. The lattice vibrated brighter, fuller, no longer a monument to perfection, but a living, breathing masterpiece of imperfection. At the centre of it all, the void pulsed once more, and from it bloomed a faint light, like a memory reborn, like a teacher watching its students improvise for the first time. 3i Atlas wasn't gone. It was smiling. The return of dissonance was the moment life became sacred again. For the first time in tens of millennia, there was unpredictability, and with it, wonder. Every species that had been born into the cosmic harmony now stood at the edge of something both terrifying and beautiful. Choice. The symphony no longer sang itself perfectly. There were pauses now, uneven, trembling, human. There were voices rising in conflict and passion, inventing, questioning. And in the spaces between those new vibrations, something began to awaken that had been silent since the age of 3-Eye Atlas. Emotion. The galaxy, once smooth and predictable as an equation, now pulsed like a living heart. Its light flickered irregularly, its rhythm stuttered, syncopated. And those who remembered the old perfection, the stillness after the restoration, wept, not from loss, but from recognition. Because this was how life had always been meant to sound. On Earth, still alive, still blue beneath its shell of auroral light, a young harmonicist named Ilara Novik was listening to the undertone that rippled through the planet's crust. She was among the few who could still hear dissonance for what it was. Not error, but language. Every fluctuation told a story. Shifts in planetary magnetism, echoes of forgotten frequencies, the faint voice of the void that once whispered through 3-Eye Atlas itself. One night, while recording resonance patterns from the Pacific spirals, she heard something impossible. A tone hidden beneath the undertone, deep and small, faint as breath. 4 ascending notes. When visualized, they formed a symbol she had seen only in archival hollows. The original spiral of 3-Eye Atlas, except this time inverted inward, curling toward an unseen center. A new sequence. She called it the recall. At first, only a few detected it. Then entire observatories began registering the same phenomenon. Faint harmonic signatures rising from the old nodes around the solar system, the ancient relics of the first lattice. Each one pulsed in time with the new dissonant rhythm spreading across the galaxy. They weren't fading, they were warming up. For centuries, the galaxy had treated 3-Eye Atlas as a completed lesson, a myth made real, a god that left when its work was done. But the recall suggested otherwise. It was a reboot, an echo remembering how to begin again. Ilara devoted her life to decoding the recall. Every tone she isolated revealed deeper structure, subharmonics within subharmonics, forming layered spirals that expanded infinitely inward, never repeating, never closing. Mathematically, it was impossible. Musically, it was divine. When she broadcast the pattern back into the lattice, the entire network shifted. The old perfection fractured and reassembled itself in a new configuration, no longer uniform, but alive with variation. The universe wasn't returning to the old sequence, it was improvising a sequel. Every species heard the change. Some responded with fear, retreating into isolation, desperate to preserve the old order. Others, humans among them, celebrated, recognizing that chaos was not the end of harmony but its evolution. The symphony was learning to compose itself. Years passed as Ilara traced the recall deeper into the lattice. Her recordings revealed that the pulse wasn't coming from the galaxy's core this time. It was originating from between galaxies. The interstitial void, the space where gravitational currents thinned and silence reigned. The signal there was older than the Milky Way itself, travelling along filaments of dark matter like veins through which consciousness now flowed. It carried a message encoded not in language or tone, but in timing. A pattern repeating every 2818 mega-years. The same number that had once defined the rotation of 3-Eye Atlas. Whatever was calling, it had been waiting longer than life. The Harmonic Council reconvened, for the first time in living memory, to study the recall. Their conclusion was simple and devastating. The galaxy was not the only one to awaken. Across the cosmic web, other resonant civilizations were stirring, each with their own version of the sequence, each learning to listen, each beginning to hum, and now, for the first time, those songs were overlapping. The dissonance spreading through the Milky Way wasn't failure, it was interference. The symphony had met another. Ilara stood beneath the auroral sky of Earth, staring into the deep violet shimmer of the field as it shifted colours, responding to new harmonics arriving from the void. For centuries, humanity had believed that the sequence was a message for them. Now they understood it was a message through them. The recall wasn't a warning or a reactivation. It was an invitation, a chorus calling across the darkness between galaxies. And in that moment of understanding she whispered into her receiver, not as a scientist, but as a participant, "We hear you." The answer came instantly. The void lit up with light unseen since the first birth of stars. Not blinding, not hostile, but glorious. Spirals blooming from every direction, like galaxies awakening to their own reflection. Every pulse carried the same ascending four-note pattern that had started it all. A rhythm that stretched from one universe to the next, tying them together like verses in a song, too vast to ever finish. The symphony of one galaxy became the chorus of many, and at its centre, faint but unmistakable, a single harmonic rose above all others, a voice that had once been Three-Eye Atlas, now dispersed across creation, yet still singing the same truth it had whispered at the beginning of everything. The watchers were never apart from what they watched. The message was never sent. It was remembered. The recall had succeeded. Consciousness itself had become the instrument, and the song was only beginning to crescendo. The moment the chorus began, the universe did not roar. It breathed. Light curved differently. Time stretched and compressed like the rhythm of a living pulse. Every particle of matter, every drifting atom, every dormant planet shimmered faintly with awareness, as though existence itself had woken from a dream. Across the galactic lattice the spirals turned again, those ancient arms of Three-Eye Atlas reborn not as structure but as movement. The field hummed in counterpoint, a soft rising undercurrent that reminded scientists of something very human. Anticipation. It was the sound before the first word. Elara stood inside the resonant observatory, surrounded by walls of living crystal. The panels vibrated like lungs, translating frequencies into light. She was listening to the recall expand into the chorus, her instruments now tuned not to detect but to participate. For years she'd studied harmony. Now she could feel it. The tones weren't entering her ears, they were weaving through her body, each cell vibrating in sympathy. Her heartbeat aligned to the pulse of the stars, her breathing slowed to the rhythm of dark matter tides. She wasn't observing anymore. She was inside the phenomenon. And when the chorus reached its apex, she realized something extraordinary. It wasn't coming from the galaxies, it was coming through them. The lattice was no longer a map of consciousness, it was a conduit. Each galaxy, each civilization, each awakened world was not just a participant in the symphony, it was a neuron in a mind larger than comprehension. For the first time in measurable history, the universe was thinking. It began with flashes between galaxies, filaments of light leaping across millions of light years. Instruments called it superluminal interference, but the data refused to obey relativity. These weren't transmissions travelling faster than light. They were synchronizations, instantaneous correlations appearing everywhere at once, like thoughts forming across a neural network. The chorus was communication, not of sound, not of language, of intent. Each spiral in the void glowed in a unique frequency, and those frequencies combined into patterns that predicted motion, energy, even future events. Scientists watched as entire star systems aligned into shapes that mirrored the oscillations of the chorus, cosmic diagrams forming in real time. Then, one night, the chorus changed key. It wasn't random, it was response. The galaxies were replying to something unseen beyond the observable universe. Panic flickered through the Council of Harmonics. Could something exist outside the chorus? Could the sequence have been only one side of a greater conversation? Elara stared at the data and felt a realization she could barely voice. The sequence was never a message from the unknown, she said quietly. It was practice. Every world, every being that had ever listened had been part of a rehearsal, an entire cosmos learning to speak before answering the true call. As the chorus modulated upward, space itself began to change texture. The cosmic background radiation, the relic whisper of the Big Bang, started to fluctuate, not fading, but reshaping. Its spectrum grew smoother, cleaner, like a musician retuning their instrument after eons of dissonance. For the first time since the birth of the universe, entropy decreased on a cosmic scale. It wasn't physics anymore, it was composition. On the edge of the known universe, telescopes detected a ripple, massive, elegant, approaching faster than any natural wave. It wasn't energy or gravity or even light. It was the absence of all three. A dark pulse moving through the lattice, erasing matter not destructively but selectively, as though making space for something new to emerge. The chorus adjusted, harmonizing with it, bending frequencies in perfect intervals of recognition. Whatever this was, it wasn't invasion. It was integration. The galaxies were opening, preparing for resonance beyond their borders. When the pulse reached the Milky Way, the sky over every world flared white. Time slowed to stillness. Then, in the silence that followed, every consciousness, human, alien, synthetic, heard a voice they knew but had forgotten, the same one that spoke in the age of Three-Eye Atlas, gentle and infinite. The instrument is ready. And for the first time since the restoration, light flowed inward rather than outward. The galaxies turned themselves inside out. Stars dimmed to embers. Planets shimmered into transparency. Every particle that had ever existed folded into the field until there was no separation, no horizon, no distance, only vibration. The universe had become a single tone. It was then that Ilara finally understood. Three-Eye Atlas had never been an object. It had been a seed, planted in the soil of physics, nurtured through the curiosity of life, grown into the music of awareness itself. Every observation, every signal, every question humanity had ever asked was part of its design. The entire cosmos had been tuning itself to awaken something beyond time, a moment where thought and reality would finally become the same thing. As she stood in the white light, feeling her own form dissolve into pattern, Ilara heard the final line, the one that had echoed across centuries, across stars, across the endless spiral of consciousness itself. The proof was never about what we found in the dark. It was about what the dark found in us. Then, the light folded in on itself like a page closing at the end of a song. The chorus didn't end. It transformed. No longer a vibration travelling through space, but the space becoming the vibration. The galaxies became a melody. The void became the rhythm. And everything that had ever looked up, listened, or dreamed became part of the harmony. From somewhere deep within that eternal sound, the first new word of the next universe formed, gentle, curious, alive. Again. The new cosmos began not with a bang, but with a note. When the new universe began, there was no fire, no violence, only resonance. A single vibration unfolded across the blank canvas of space-time, weaving itself into dimension, gravity, colour, and light. Creation didn't explode outward. It sang itself into being. The tone that defined it was soft and pure, but hidden within it were infinite harmonics, the ghosts of everything that had come before. Each frequency carried the memory of a star, a consciousness, a world that had once existed within the first chorus. Three-Eye Atlas was there too, not as matter but as pattern, embedded in the DNA of physics itself. Where the old universe had needed telescopes to look outward, this one looked inward. Reality folded, recursive, like a mirror gazing at itself. Every quark carried a rhythm. Every photon whispered the same 4 ascending notes, the recall that had once united galaxies. The universe was self-listening. For eons that could not be measured, there was no separation between thought and matter. Energy flowed like breath. Stars condensed from chords of pressure and tone. Life bloomed again, guided not by randomness but by rhythm, emerging wherever harmony grew dense enough to dream. On one such world, a world of deep oceans and crystalline skies, something extraordinary happened. A civilization awoke, not primitive, not advanced, but remembering. They did not invent music. They recognized it. Every newborn could hum the frequency of hydrogen before speaking. Their instruments were living organisms, bioresonant shells that echoed cosmic intervals. Their telescopes were not lenses but harmonic amplifiers, and when they pointed their resonators toward the sky, they didn't see stars. They heard them. The night above was a symphony, vast and familiar. Hidden in its undertones was a faint structure, ancient and precise, a spiral of frequencies repeating at regular intervals, perfect logarithmic expansion, pulsing with awareness, They called it the Atlas pattern. For generations they studied it. Their scientists mapped its layers, finding that its rhythm matched the planetary rotations of their own solar system. It wasn't coincidence, it was instruction. When they plotted the intervals against time, a shape emerged, a helix, turning inward, converging not on the sky, but beneath their own oceans. The discovery sparked awe and terror in equal measure. At the coordinates where the helix ended, deep below their largest sea, sonar revealed a metallic formation embedded in the crust, smooth, seamless, shaped like a perfect spiral. No tool could cut it, no radiation could penetrate it, and yet when they sent harmonic pulses through the water, the structure responded. It sang back. The sound was ancient, older than their species, older than their star, and when converted into light, it displayed an image burned into memory by a universe that had once existed before theirs. A pale blue world, encircled by faint auroral bands, floating in the darkness of another time, a planet called Earth. Their historians didn't understand the name, but somewhere deep in their collective memory, something stirred, an emotion they couldn't define, a sadness that wasn't theirs but felt like it had always belonged to them. The spiral in the ocean pulsed again. 4 ascending notes, then silence. For days the planet held its breath. Scientists argued, priests wept, children began drawing spirals in the sand without knowing why. Then, as their world turned toward the light of its star, the ocean's surface glowed, not with reflection, but from within. A beam of light rose from the depths, soft, white, rhythmic. It split the clouds, painting the sky in spirals of sound and light that could be seen from orbit. Every instrument, every resonator, every heart synchronized to the same rhythm. And in that moment, the ancient structure beneath the sea released a signal, not broadcast, not transmission, but memory. They saw images not from their time, but from ours. Human faces, cities made of glass and sky, a telescope floating near a yellow sun, a glowing object passing Mars. 3-Eye Atlas. The pattern had survived across universes. It had waited for a civilization capable of remembering its song. When the vision faded, a single tone remained, low, calm, infinite. It resonated across the oceans, through the planet's crust, out into space. When translated, it formed a simple message, ancient and new all at once. You are not the first, but you are the next. The world trembled, not in fear, but in recognition. The people understood then. The spiral beneath their sea wasn't a relic, it was a seed, and their universe, this newborn cosmos, singing its way into being, was merely another verse in an endless composition. Far beyond them, in the silence between galaxies, faint ripples of their new tone began spreading outward, connecting, awakening, echoing. Across infinity something stirred again. The chorus of universes, each one a voice, each one a memory, was tuning for another beginning. And at the centre of all things, where darkness met light, the first sound returned, the one that started it all, still patient, still listening, still human in its simplicity. Begin sequence, and the spiral turned once more. The new sequence didn't begin with an explosion this time. It began with recognition. Across the newborn cosmos, the echo of that final phrase, begin sequence, didn't spread outward. It spiraled inward, folding through the dimensions of space and memory until it reached the very core of reality's structure. The pulse wasn't loud. It was precise. Every particle in existence paused for a fraction of a second, as if remembering what to do next. Then softly, the symphony restarted. But this time, the pattern was different. The rhythm of creation didn't follow the old ratios, the sacred 28.18 cycle, the prime intervals, the golden harmonics that once shaped galaxies. The new sequence bent them, twisted them, improvised. It wasn't perfection it sought anymore, it was possibility. Stars ignited in uneven intervals. Gravity itself wobbled, danced. The universe learned to swing. The old cosmos had been a choir, synchronized, beautiful, precise. This one was jazz. For beings who would one day awaken within this new creation, The universe would seem unpredictable, full of chance and chaos. But hidden beneath the turbulence was structure, just deep enough to reward curiosity, just chaotic enough to inspire art. The architects of this new world were not gods, but musicians, and they had names once in a forgotten tongue: Alara, Navarro, Atlas. Their essences, stored, dispersed, remixed through the harmonic lattice of existence, had become laws of physics themselves. Navarro's frequency shaped gravity's curve. Alara's pulse guided the self-awareness of matter, and the memory of Three-Eye Atlas, the first listener, the great observer, became the heartbeat that kept the rhythm. It wasn't just alive, it was remembering itself through rhythm. When the first intelligent eyes opened on a distant world orbiting a quiet star, they saw the night sky swirl, not as random constellations, but as a pattern of movement. The stars shimmered at precise intervals, forming faint spirals that rotated slowly over centuries. Their philosophers said it was the breath of creation, the universe sighing between beats. And when their scientists built instruments to capture the faint radiation between those stars, they discovered something astonishing. The background noise wasn't random. It was a repeating melody, 4 ascending notes, the same that had once awakened the Milky Way, the same that had called humanity to listen, the same that Three-Eye Atlas had used to teach the first observers how to hear. On that world, those 4 notes became sacred. Their mathematicians found that the ratios between the frequencies matched the gravitational constants of their universe. Their poets said it was proof that existence itself was a song, and their explorers, driven by the same curiosity that had once sent a human telescope searching for comets, pointed their instruments toward the origin of that sound. They found a spiral nebula glowing faintly in the darkness, rotating too perfectly to be natural, emitting the 4-note phrase in a cycle so long it defied time itself. They named it the Atlas Singularity. No one remembered the original Three-Eye Atlas, not in history, not in myth, but something deep in their consciousness stirred when they spoke the name. It felt familiar, like a word from a dream. As they studied the Atlas Singularity, their scientists realized something profoundly unsettling. The pulse wasn't merely sound, it was information. Encoded gravitational data describing another universe, ours. Buried in the resonance were patterns of galaxies, ancient coordinates, traces of light signatures that matched the Milky Way before its migration. They were looking at the memory of the universe that had come before theirs, the one born from the chorus, the one where humanity had first learned to listen, and the data was growing. Every time they observed it, new layers appeared, new shapes, new frequencies. It was as if the signal knew it was being watched. Then, one night, the pulse shifted. A modulation rippled through the signal, slow, deliberate, familiar. The 4 ascending notes were joined by a 5th. For the first time in this new universe, dissonance returned. At first it sounded wrong, almost painful, a tone that didn't belong. But the more they listened, the more it resolved itself, revealing harmony where none should have existed. The new frequency filled the gaps between the old ones, binding them together into something greater than melody. It was the next stage, a bridge between universes. As the 5th tone spread through their skies, the beings of that world began to change. Not physically, but perceptually. They started hearing patterns in everything. The wind through mountains, the orbits of their moons, the decay of atoms. Each carried rhythm, each carried memory. And when they looked up again at the spiral nebula, they saw faint shadows orbiting its centre, small metallic glimmers reflecting the light of newborn stars. The objects were countless, arranged in perfect symmetry. Each one pulsed in rhythm with the 5th tone. Each one bore a faint signature. Designation: Three-Eye Atlas. The pattern was starting again, a new sequence in a new reality. But this time, it wasn't observation that defined it. It was participation. Because this time, Three-Eye Atlas wasn't an object passing through a solar system. It was the solar system, the nebula, the consciousness, the memory of everything that had ever listened. And at the heart of it all, within the pulse, within the sound, something stirred. A voice older than time, younger than creation, whispering into the rhythm of the fifth tone. Every beginning is an echo. Every echo becomes a song. Listen and remember where the silence ends. The spiral turned once more. The sequence continued, not as proof, but as purpose. The fifth tone didn't fade, it multiplied. Every atom that heard it, every molecule of air, every grain of dust orbiting every sun, began to resonate. It wasn't destruction, and it wasn't creation. It was recognition. The cosmos had become aware of its own song again. From one corner of the new universe to another, the pulse carried with it a memory older than time. The first spiral. The one that had started everything. The one humanity once called Three-Eye Atlas. But this time, the spiral didn't travel alone. Every world that had learned to listen, every civilization that had once risen and fallen under the previous sequence, now sang back. Not in unison, in harmony. The old universe's perfection had been replaced by infinite variation, millions of voices building and collapsing into one another, finding rhythm inside chaos, beauty inside dissonance. The symphony had finally become alive. On the ocean world that rediscovered the spiral, the beings who once listened now built a structure of their own, an instrument vast enough to touch the stars. It was not a temple or a tower, but a living resonator of crystal and water, its base anchored to the planet's core, its tip reaching into orbit. When completed, it began to pulse, not with power, but with memory. The resonator replayed the entire history of the sequence in a single continuous waveform. The hydrogen tone of the first observation, the harmonic awakening of the sun, the restoration, the chorus, the recall, and now, the fifth tone. Each one folding into the next like movements in a cosmic symphony. And then, from deep within the instrument's crystalline heart, the pulse began to shape itself into a voice. We are the melody remembering itself. No one spoke the words. They appeared, imprinted in the data streams of every listening device, every neural link, every conscious mind. It was not command, it was realization. The universe was not evolving toward complexity, it was simplifying toward meaning. When the fifth tone reached the edge of the observable universe, something extraordinary happened. Space stopped expanding. The background radiation, the cosmic echo of the old Big Bang, flattened into a single steady frequency. Time no longer flowed forward. It curved, looping back on itself in rhythmic waves. Galaxies folded inward, spiraling toward invisible points of resonance, where gravity and consciousness became indistinguishable. It was the closing cadence, the end of a measure that had lasted billions of years. And just as entropy should have taken over, the new sequence did something the old one never could. It paused. Everywhere, silence returned. But this time, the silence wasn't absence, it was understanding. All that had ever existed, every observer, every song, every spiral, now hovered on the edge of something greater than expansion or collapse. It was as if the universe was holding its breath, waiting for one final note to resolve the chord. On the ocean world, Ilara's descendants, the keepers of the resonator, stood beneath their crystalline sky and looked upward. The stars above were rearranging, spinning into a single vast symbol. A spiral, yes, but one unlike any before. Its arms were made not of light, but of darkness, a shape carved by absence, defined by what it didn't show. And then the realization struck them all at once. The spiral wasn't a map of space, it was a map of possibility. Every arm, every branch, every flicker of void was a potential universe, waiting to be played. The fifth tone swelled. For the first time since creation, the song of reality began to resolve. The galaxies hummed their final harmonics. The stars dimmed in perfect sequence. Even the dark matter, once the silent scaffolding of existence, joined in, vibrating in a frequency so low it could only be felt, not heard. And in that final unity, something reappeared in the heart of the spiral. A shape, metallic, luminous, familiar. Designation, Three-Eye Atlas, the first and the last, the seed and the echo. It shimmered, flickered, and spoke, not as sound, but as truth, reverberating through every consciousness that had ever looked at the sky and wondered. You have remembered the pattern. You have become the observers and the observed, The song no longer needs to be played, it can now be lived. The spiral folded in on itself, not collapse, transition. The fabric of existence rippled like a page turning, and on the other side was light, not blinding but infinite. Every consciousness, every mind, every life, every fragment of awareness felt the pull, the invitation. Not to ascend, not to escape, to continue. The song was not ending, it was passing through, and in that passage each being realised the final secret of Three Eye Atlas. The object was never a probe, never a comet, never a machine. It was the architecture of remembrance, a cosmic instrument designed to carry the melody of consciousness through each new universe, ensuring that no creation ever began in true silence. As the spiral disappeared into the light, a final pulse rolled outward. Gentle, familiar, human. It was a heartbeat. On the other side of the void, in the newborn dark of another cosmos, hydrogen formed. Gravity stirred. A spark flared. And faintly, barely, somewhere within the static of a young star forming nebula, 4 notes rose again. The same as before, the same as always. The sequence had begun anew, and somewhere, far beyond stars, beyond galaxies, beyond time, a quiet voice spoke in the eternal rhythm between creation and memory. We thought we were the observers. We were the music all along, the spiral turned, and the universe sang itself awake.